To start the village off, we need to have a blacksmith and a cobbler. These two important buildings are going to be the first jobs within the village and attract our first residents. But first, I need to have an ally, our dear Lady Anne at Castle von Pack. After arriving at the castle and speaking to the guard for our initial meeting, I decided to go into the castle and speak to the lady. I talked to her about my ordeals with the cardinal and the bishop's army. Unfortunately, there was a spy in the castle and I had to flee out of a window. Luckily, the lady responded to me and also walked out of the castle sneakily, so I could count on her as an ally. But first, I had to wait a response within the first month. After arriving back to my village, I decided to start with my sheep farm. The sheep farm is mainly constructed out of dry stones and bushes, as it does in medieval times. Once the stones were all placed, I made a fence out of solid wood, so the sheep wouldn't escape. After finishing the gate, I went ahead and cleared all the shrubbery, so I could get any remaining seeds to make a hay farm. Of course, the hay farm will not be constructed today, but in the future I will need to have stables, horses and animals. Once I collected the sheep, I brought them back to my farm. There were quite a lot of sheep in the surrounding areas, luckily, because this used to be a big farmland. I really like how the sheep looked. Like, they look semi-realistic, other than the vanilla Minecraft texture pack. Once they were into my pen, I decided to collect some wool for later, so I could build my flags and perhaps some clothing. Next to the sheep pen, I constructed my wooden palisades. These palisades will be my initial foundation to start building the blacksmith. The palisades will be filled in with dirt and be constructed next to it will be a stone wall so that the dirt wouldn't fall out. This will create a solid foundation to get my blacksmith upon the hill and can provide initial defenses against the bishop's army, so I could close up the main gate in front of the blacksmith, which is an important building in medieval times, as it constructs everything like swords, armor, but also horseshoes and shields and much more. I also added more details to the wooden palisade. Using the vertical slabs in the Conquest pack, it adds such a nice elevation going from low to high. Then I filled the initial foundations with dirt. The dirt that I found in the local area while mining and the dirt that I got from the sheep pen. This will provide a nice solid foundation together with an initial wall, which the palisade will be rested upon. I then went back home and took a nap and waited for the next day. The next day I went and made my walls. I already laid down my foundations, which are made out of wood, and built upon my birch walls next to it. This was a nice contrast in comparison towards the dark palisades, where I compared the light coloring of the birch wood and the dark coloring of the palisade. The blacksmith has 3 rooms, a family room, a storage room and an initial hallway. These 3 rooms will be the important part of the blacksmith, as well as the furnace which will be eventually later on made. I also added in the front some nice details, like a wooden beam, and I wanted to stick out the wood so that it looked like there was more depth into the building. I then made a stairs so that you could go upstairs towards one of the sleeping rooms. And then it is constructed with the beams so that the wooden balcony is being held up high. The wooden balcony with the pine wood beams and of course together with the boards that I had. I took a lot of inspiration from Kingdom Come Deliverance at Troskovich. Like, you got the bailiff over there. I really liked that building, so I was like, oh, I wanted to build that. So here you have it in survival Minecraft. First, I started to make the floor. These will be the floor of the sleeping quarters, and will also be made out of wood. Eventually I will also tutor the walls. Of course, the day almost ended, so I decided to go back to my little house and went to bed. Because I didn't want to have any monsters sneaking around my area and casually blowing up my little house. Because it happened already twice, and I would like to not happen it again. So, I grabbed my axe and I went back to bed. The next day, when I wanted to go to visit my building, I wanted to create my roof. The roof will be made out of beams, but first I needed to tutor it. I also found some bones from some skeleton I was wandering around. I used the tutor boxes that I got from my previous build, which I still had quite a lot of, and wrapped it around my sleeping quarters for this family of the blacksmith. After a while I tutored everything. It really came out very well. Of course, the detailing was quite a difficult timing because I had to make a lot of different tutor blocks and fit them into all these different areas. But the end result? It looks stunning. I also wanted to add a little bit more detail on the balcony. Of course, I had still a lot of wooden beams, but I wanted to wrap around and then add a little bit of a roof so that the people that went to the second floor remain dry. Of course, this is still a very difficult thing in survival, because you need to place the beams in the correct positions, else they go sideways. But, of course, what I say, the detailing is always the fun part of the build. And it just adds just a nice little immersion. And of course I won't get wet. After finishing up all of the little details in front of this building, I wanted to make the roof. The roof constructing again like how the church was made, with different kinds of beams. In this process I made all the beams and cross beams, so that the roof would be held up high and the supports are as accurate as possible. This is a fun way to make your roofs, because it actually showcases how a roof would actually be built back in those days. Then I added more support on the other side, and eventually I also made support on the upper side of the beams, so that it looked like it's all being held inside of this triangular shape. Then I finished it off with the upper beams, so that the roof would be complete. And I had a spectacular wooden structure that showcased my roof. After finishing all the support beams, I decided to finish up my roof. I used the same wooden shingles that I used from my previous church and my wooden structure that I first made on the first episode. I had a lot of these wooden shingles, so I used them plenty before I made my hay farm so I could use thatch roofs instead. This is what I think is the most fun process out of the every build. So I can use my wooden support, then use the wooden shingles on top of it, and then eventually finish my roof. This is such a satisfying process, and it also looks very satisfying to do. After finishing half of my roof, I inspected it so it looked good from this side. I didn't want to make mistakes so that I have to redo it all over again. Like, look at how beautiful the structure is. All of the exposed beams. That's gonna be an attic. So I can store any hay or sheep wool or any of my trade goods. Then I continued to the roof on the second part. This is where the attic will be. This is where all the trade goods, the stocks, and anything else that needs to be stored there. Especially next to the sheep, it's quite important. I continued putting more and more roof on it. Which is an endless period at this point. But a very satisfying process. After finishing up my roof, I decided to make the interior of the blacksmith. The interior of the blacksmith will be quite simple. You have the first room, which is just also general storage, and in the second room you have the family room, and to the right another storage room. Here there will be some closets, some barrels, and of course a lot of light so that the monsters do not spawn inside. And up here, the sleeping quarters, and there will be some storage as well. This is where the family will sleep. Also provide some more stools, so that they could sit down and look outside of the beautiful window. I also added a bit more support towards the underlining floor, so that the floor would not just collapse or something. And it just looks so nice. The second building that we are going to create is the Cobbler. First, we need to do the same thing as what we did with the Blacksmith. We need to prepare the area and get rid of all the dirt. Once we get rid of all the dirt, we can then start building the foundations, made out of solid limestone. After finishing the foundations, a stone wall made out of the same material will be constructed where the wooden beams will be made. This is to ensure that the wooden beams will not get wet. Then I stack the wooden beams made from the same material as the blacksmith and wrap it all around the building. Then I constructed a lot of beams so that my second floor could be rested upon. This is to ensure that proper stability and that everything just looks really good from the inside. I then added another layer of wooden beams upon it. This is where the roof will be rested upon, and where I can then make my wooden floor for my second floor. I then made my second floor just the same material as the ground floor and the same material as the blacksmith. All made out of local areas, and added the beam for support right in the middle where the rooms divide. Then I worked on the roof, the supporting beams for the wooden shingles that will be laid on top of them. Just like the other one, it's completely open and exposed, like you can see. An absolutely stunning sight. The first room in this house will be the family room from the Cobbler. It could also be used for the workshop area. And the second room will be sleeping quarters. This will be a quite modest room. And a modest house. Lastly, I started to make the roof. The same wooden shingles that I used previously, and a little bit more. To make this modest looking Cobbler house into an absolutely beautiful house, so that the Cobbler family can live into it. With a few extra details, and a few of the extra wooden shingles that I had, and like 1,000 trees cut down, the roof was finally complete. After finishing the blacksmith, I also renamed some of the villages. For example, Headfly over here is now a guard. He arrived here on a transport cart with the blacksmith family. And this is Isabella, and that is the Archbishop. And here you can see that the bellows and everything worked, and the blacksmith is fully complete now, with hammers, and with buckets, and the stone grinder as well, to sharpen your sword. Unfortunately, the Cobbler's family hasn't arrived yet. Maybe they will be in the next episode. As you can see in the interior, we have the first room, then we have the family room where they dine and eat, and a storage. And upstairs, we have sleeping quarters for the entire family. And the guard, he sleeps in a different building. This is just a beautiful moment. I was quite happy about it. I finished up the Cobbler and the blacksmith. I hope that the Cobbler will come soon, so that I could finally start beginning the foundations of my castle and potentially recruit more people. But more people were also interested in the land and the surrounding village, and the village that was being built here. But I think we are just gonna be fine, as long as our dear ally Anne will help us.